Welcome to the Soul of the Everyman on the Artist First Radio Network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. Find them at artistfirst.com. Please send your questions and comments to dj at artistfirst.com. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here they are, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
And thank you very much, Z-Man. And I am Michael Lyons.
Mm-hmm. And I'm Margaret.
And that's the show.
Quick one.
It's a quick show. No, tonight we're going to have I think a complicated show.
Yes.
I mean, we're going to lead off with a premise. This is something which is this particular viewpoint or worldview may be somewhat familiar to people who have some exposure to the popular films. The Matrix is sort of the sci-fi version of this. But some exposure to Tolle, some exposure to Stuart Hameroff, who's another interesting fellow in this field. But the gentleman that we're going to quote, and we're going to quote him right off the bat because it's, again, a sort of a complicated subject, is Donald Hoffman. Donald Hoffman.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a very well-respected researcher in this field of consciousness. And he's both a computer scientist and a mathematician. And he's been doing research in this field for many, many, many years. And his theory, or rather his take on consciousness is quite interesting because it has elements. I would say it has elements of Tolle, but where Tolle, of course, approaches it from a philosophical and from a sort of I would say not religious, but certainly a non-technical viewpoint. He's really talking about being and consciousness in the moment of now in a non-technical way. Donald Hoffman is talking about it in a highly technical, mathematical way, and talking about in much the same way that Penrose and Hameroff talk about quantum states and quantum consciousness. His take on this is what he calls conscious realism, and we're going to go right into that. So maybe the first thing is let's lead off with Donald Hoffman's quote.
Okay. Conscious realism makes a bold claim. Consciousness, not space-time and its objects, is a fundamental reality and is properly described as a network of conscious agents. Hoffman.
Mm-hmm. And that's a little bit semantically dense. It needs some unpacking, in other words.
Right. Why don't we start with the definition of conscious realism?
I will do, and I have it quoted over here. This will be posted up on the website as well. This is sort of the tagline of his definition of conscious realism.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was sort of pithy, so I'll just quote him again.
Mm-hmm.
So this is also Hoffman. You are not a being, you being all of us, you are not a being who experiences reality. You are a being who experiences a survival simulation so convincing that you never once thought to question the screen.
Mm.
So that has sort of the sort of echoes of the Matrix, and people talk about and it's been sort of popularized what's outside the simulation, if you will. So there's all this sort of percolating around in this question, but to put a little bit of a finer point on it, Hoffman is postulating in so many words the sort of the ancient concept of where is reality, where does it actually exist. He has another part of his this was part of a talk that he was giving. Another part of the talk he was giving is said as sort of as an example is that your interface to reality is biased on what works not what actually is, but what works. And what he means by that is that he uses the analogy very familiar to everybody these days of a computer screen. You sit down, look at your computer screen, and there's something on there that you say, well, that's my file. And you move your mouse over to it and you drag the file and you drop it in a trash can on the screen. And you say, well, I just got rid of that file. And it's right. You have gotten rid of that file. You've thrown out the file. But everything that you did from an objective reality point of view was infinitely more complicated. What actually happened, the billions of operations of machine code that executed inside your computer, the actual data that was in one spot and now is in another spot, all the references to that data, all the individual components of it that moved around, if you will, but not really. That you think, well, I'm just picking something up. Well, you're not picking up anything. I'm moving across the screen. You're not moving anything. You're dropping it in a trash bin. But yet those actions are correct. They are effective. They get what you want to get done. But if you were to actually try to perceive the reality of it, it would be so complicated as to be paralyzing, as to make it impossible to do what you wanted to do. So what Hoffman is saying is that the abstraction and the interface that we use to interact with the world is biased on one thing: practical, survivable actions that work, things that actually got you to be fed, actually got you to move from one place to another, actually got you to interact with what we call reality. And then he abstracts that a little bit further. And the abstraction of that is that the fact that we all interact with the world in our perceptions of what the world is, and that we come to some version of agreement in what the world is biased on the fact that that's what got us all to survive. That's what got us all to actually live in reality. Infinitely more complicated than actually what we do.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to liken that to an analogy of language. As we use the language, it's a series of sounds and words that we produce. But if you don't know the language, you sit there and you go, it makes no sense. So the idea is that there are symbols that get translated into a meaning for us individually, and then how we put those words together forms ideas or concepts. And what he's talking about is understanding that when you're on the screen, you're moving things around, and to you it makes sense. I have this file, I don't want it anymore, I'm going to get rid of it. Well, what actually happens when you're trying to get rid of it? How did that file actually get there, and what's in that file? All of that together creates a situation where you want to do something with it. And we're so familiar with this, like familiar with English, if this is your primary language, that you immediately take steps into doing what you say you wanted to do. So it's a building of a network of conscious workings. And you know how to go from point A to point B. In other words, you initiate something, you have an idea, and then you know what you need to do to get to the end point. So in that respect, you're building a blueprint of reality in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And accepting that as your baseline. This is your reality, how you function with these ideas on the screen. And when you think of it, it's just amazing that the human mind can do this. They're conscious of being able to do this.
So I would say we're almost unconscious of being able to do it. It's, as you said, so familiar that you take it all for, to use the phrase, you take it all for granted.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of, again, this idea of you walk across the room, and if you individually tried to pilot each muscle so that you could balance and coordinate your legs and your arms, your perceptions. If you tried to do all that consciously, so literally piloting the machine step by step, cell by cell,
Mm-hmm.
you would be paralyzed. You would not survive for an instant as a complex life form moving through a incredibly complicated environment. And then just to do that move, not even to perceive what you're doing, but to move yourself through that, if you had to individually animate every cell of your body, you can't even think of it. You can't, well, I don't even know where would I even begin?
Right. If you go right into the processes, the deep processes, it's more than just coordinating your muscles.
Right.
It's going deeper into how the muscle interacts with the bone, let's say, and making that movement, even just the production of it.
I mean, you would, if you said to yourself, well, I'm going to now begin the process of moving sugars into my cells so that ATP can latch onto them and spawn off a cloud of electrons, which is going to start to contract.
Processes.
And just describing it, and you're going to sit there and say, I don't think I can get out of this chair.
Right.
So in Margaret's, the analogy of using words is, again, so you become familiar with the whole process. Okay, what is the idea of what we're doing right now? We're talking to an imaginary audience. Maybe there's nobody out, but it doesn't matter. We're talking to each other. Even that is enough. If I had to direct myself to form my next word, my next breath, my next tongue movement, to move my mouth, my lips, and all of a sudden, I wouldn't be able to even begin to think about the next thought because I'd be so busy moving one lip motor muscle, But you do none of those things. Why? Because all of the incredible complexity of just moving your body around, you say, well, I just know how to do it. Well, yeah, you do. But what Hoffman is saying is that the reason that you can run across the yard and catch a frisbee without even really thinking about it, except that you're having fun catching a frisbee and then throwing it back and laughing about it and thinking about what you're doing, and the dog's running up to you and your bed, all the things that are happening just as you run across the yard, throwing a frisbee back and forth between you and your friends or you and your kids or whatever, all works because we've completely abstracted what's actually happening. You're not thinking about the physics of a frisbee or why it flies or how hard you have to throw it, for argument's sake. You say, well, I guess I got to flick my wrist. Then if you start to think about, the actual thing that you're piloting, this is another interesting part. People have done these studies. So human beings are really, I'll just divert, for a minute, digress. Human beings are really good at throwing things. I mentioned frisbees, but really, really good at throwing things. One of our superpowers is throwing things. No other life form on the planet, the larger animals, are really good at throwing. We can huck a rock for hundreds of feet accurately. We can throw a baseball, at 95, 100 miles an hour and throw a perfect strike, Well, most animals can't. I would say almost all animals cannot do that. And people, of course, have various talents. But the point is, of what I'm trying to make is to throw a rock, to huck a rock so hard that you could hurt something and accurately. Your body, your nerves are rather poor conductors of information. They're slow and they're not really excellent, they're not excellent transmitters. Okay. So you start, you say to yourself, I'm going to throw a rock and I'm going to hit, this tree right over there. And you pick up the rock and you start to immediately you're actually gauging how heavy it is. You're looking where the tree is. You're going through the motions. You're drawing your arm back. All this without really much thinking about it. You start to throw the rock, and then to do it correctly, to do it exactly where you have to release it with the right amount of spin and the to throw something fast and accurately, you have to send the signal to release the rock well before. Your brain has to know that the signal to release the rock is eons of time before you actually release it. So
chemical responses.
right, and your eyes that are seeing where you are going to throw the rock, the light that you actually have to process to see where you're going to throw it is again very slow. It's working its way through your eyeball, to your retina, through your brain, to the back of your brain, to the front of your brain, and rolling around your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So all that has to get factored in. All of those delays. You're not throwing at a tree that you see. You're throwing at a reconstructed image of a physical object, which isn't exactly where you think it is. It's not, where your muscles are actually letting go is well before you actually have to. All the things that you've already factored in, millions and millions of complicated things. Don't think about any of them.
Right. It's just if you are trying to calculate the trajectory from this and what angle and this speed and the length, all the mathematics involved, your brain's not sitting there calculating angles and wind speed and whatever else may be in the way of getting this rock to hit this tree. It's really quite amazing when you think of it that a human being is actually able to do any of this. And it has nothing to do, as you said, with this physical body sitting there and calculating and estimating how much force to do any of it. It's when you think of the processes that are involved to get the information in and then into your head, and then you're going to react or you're going to execute what you want to do. There's a lot of, what would be the word?
You're making it up.
Right. There's a projected image in your head.
Right.
That you're sitting there going, okay, I'm going to throw this rock over there. But the whole process of actually doing it without interrupting yourself. I mean, here's a question. Have you ever decided that, okay, I'm going to do this, and then there's second guessing right in the middle of it, and there's a bit of hesitation when that happens. It's like when you're learning a new technique, say in self-defense, there is a reason why you do repetitive motion, so that your body does it automatically. If it's a block, if it's a punch, just repetitive. You're able to get the appropriate angle in order to get the most effective block, and then a counter with an opening. And it's something that once you continue to do it correctly, it's like the body goes, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. But when you're first learning it, you're like, okay, wait, my arm, my outside arm is supposed to stop that blow. What's the most effective angle? Do I when do I do this in order to do the interception of the blow coming in? You begin to learn your boundaries and length of arm, and where your the circumference around you, what you're capable of doing in order to block. So it takes time to get that mechanism in. But even just to do the mechanism, this is the very beginning. It's learning. It's like, wait, how in the world am I doing that? It's moving.
Well, so the basic thing is that you're reconstructing reality all the time.
Right.
And so what Hoffman, to go back to Hoffman, is his idea, this idea of conscious realism, is that your biological mechanism for dealing with reality, which you're only seeing, you're only perceiving reality in vision in a very limited, a very narrow band of light, very, very narrow band of light that you see in. You're only able to touch that which is close to your body. You can reach out to a certain extent and touch. So everything which you are not touching, you're imagining from what you see. You're reconstructing everything you don't touch. If you closed your eyes, if you imagined yourself to be blind from birth, the only thing that you would be able to reconstruct from your reality would be what you could touch. And perhaps, you could use your other senses as well. Hearing would be very important. You could hear, but as far as you would be, as far as your universe, the universe that you would live in, you would have no concept except by hearsay, by literally people telling you, there's something called a star. There's something called a tree. Well, I can touch the bark of the tree, but no, the tree has this amazing thing called a leaf, and it's way above your head, or the sky has clouds, and no matter what, if you could not reconstruct the image of a cloud from, the very narrow band of light, that cloud would have no reality within your consciousness. In fact, it could be easily said that to someone who could not perceive the light that we all kind of take for granted, that the universe itself has no objective reality in their consciousness. You could tell them all about clouds, but the only experience that they might have that they could relate is that you say, well, it's foggy. So it's like you're touching a cloud. And a person who could not reconstruct the reality of the light waves that you're receiving and turning them into your idea of consciousness, what a cloud is, what a bird is, what anything is. Can't you see that their universe, their entire universe, is very different from yours, but yet this is the most salient point in conscious realism. They're still perceiving reality. So reality hasn't changed at all. The amount of information about reality that they have is different from yours, but reality hasn't changed. You wouldn't say that a person who can't see, it doesn't exist anymore. No, of course not. They exist in a very different perception of reality. So you say, well, that's sort of trivial, of course, but no, but it goes to the actual point. We don't take into account that, if there's 8 billion people on the planet, there's 8 billion different realities, all running as a simulation, as a reconstruction, as a story that we tell ourselves about what reality is. We can all agree on much of it, which is how we interact with each other. It's how, I can say something and someone who understands the odd sounds that I make can kind of understand what I'm trying to say and say, well, I think I understand what you say. Are you trying to say this? And I'm like, no, I wasn't trying to say that at all.
Well, it's understanding that each individual
Right.
creates their own interface with the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
And they must form their own connections. And in order to do that, that's the beginning of their own personal process.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the idea that you're communicating means that you've got to agree on some foundation on which to build, to begin to transfer the concept, whether it's an idea, an emotion, a color, a texture, an experience. And this is where the communication aspect has got to step in. But that's a outside of the formation of the reality that an individual must form in order to interact with the world. And when they're functioning in this mode of interface, because you're building interfaces continually, it's intuitive and creative. We as humans do this automatically. We want to interact with everything around us. It's part of the foundation of play when we start. Just experimenting with the physical reality around us, textures and colors, the five senses, beginning to form a foundation of that experience. And when you look at another person, you're sitting here going, wait, that's another human being or another being. Do they feel the same way we do? I love watching little ones trying to interact with one another because many times they don't have a full vocabulary. So if they don't have the vocabulary, they begin simply by mirroring one to the other what they're doing. This is their form of play. It's a parallel play, mirror play, where you're building something. The one would start building a tower and the other one builds a tower, and then they both knock it down. And they do it again. But that communication of, look, this is my experience. Oh, you're having the same experience. Well, if I knock it down and that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
The beginning. This is the mirror reality. This is one of the main reasons why we always look for someone to hang with, because we want to be able to explore that interface and begin to figure out a way to interface with another human being, which means that you got to go through that other person's interface as well. So it's a complex thing, a relationship, where first of all, you got to agree on certain vocabularies, whether it's a play vocabulary or a verbal vocabulary or a family vocabulary. There are certain base concepts that you springboard off of in order to get to more complex or higher concepts. And consciousness is at the core of it all. sometimes when you're interacting with another human being, you're looking at it going, yeah, this ain't working. What I'm saying is not working, and what I'm trying to do is not working. You might just throw the whole thing out and start at the beginning, which is a quiet presence. And the two of you just look at each other, when one person comes into presence, it commands the other person to stop and go, wait a minute. It's kind of that, again, it's like the mirror thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a reset. Let's reset. Let's find out where we can begin to interact one to the other. But it's a foundational way of human interactions.
Yeah, communication.
But the ability to give space for that, that you understand that your interface is not that person's interface. That's a very mature consciousness that can do that.
Well, I want to go back to what you started with, which is, see, mirror play is a very, it's very fundamental, as you said. When children come together the first time, they mirror each other's experiences. And it's very comforting when someone mirrors your experience. In fact, there's a lot of psychological studies about communications, that if somebody comes into a room and you start talking with them and you cross your arms, almost immediately they'll cross their arms. It's unconscious sort of mimicry. And it's because, you're showing the other person that you're, you have a certain basis of understanding. It's at a body level. People will nod their heads. If this is culturally, the way of agreement, if you nod your head as you speak, the other person will almost unconsciously nod their head along with them. And one of the ways you get someone to agree with you is you make agreement motions as you try to present your point. So what are you doing? You're consciously attempting to communicate on multiple levels. And there's a great sort of bias to reflect what you are receiving. Now, there's also, if you don't agree, there's a whole bunch of things going on there as well. But what's scary is, what people find scary is if you have a perception about something, about the reality, and you find someone whose perception of that same reality differs violently or differs radically from yours, and you can dismiss them if they appear not to have any power. But if someone's perception of reality radically differs from yours, it sets up a tremendous tension, because you're wondering, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my reality is wrong. Maybe there's something wrong with me. And this is where initial conflicts or misunderstandings can blow out of proportion. And what Margaret said, I wanted to go back to it, is that the basics, if you're having a problem communicating with someone, one of the ways you form bonds and you start to overcome differences is you start to experience or try to inculcate shared experiences amongst you. What's a great one? If you have a bunch of strangers and you bring them into a room and you put a bunch of food in front of them and everyone sits down and eats, it goes from a bunch of strangers to people who start sharing anecdotes and first names, and there's some immediate community. Well, because that shared experience, that shared perception of reality, the mirroring of actions, we're all eating and serving and pleases and thank yous and all that other nonsense that goes with it, starts to say that this person is like me. This person's seeing reality the way I see reality. I can see myself in them, and therefore I feel a kinship, a relationship. Well, all of that, every piece of that is happening within your consciousness. If you do what Margaret said, which is you start to inspect your own perceptions of reality and say to yourself, well, what am I actually doing? What is my awareness? Becoming aware of your awareness, starting to explore your own perception of reality. You start to see that, everything I am perceiving is happening within my consciousness. Where does Tolle says this? The universe, no matter if it's a dream or a nightmare or quantum or what, it all happens, no matter what, all of it happens within your consciousness. It doesn't matter if it's the Matrix or if it's a computer simulation or if it's real or fake or anything else. It still has to happen within your perceptions. Consciousness is the basis. And Douglas Hoffman also says consciousness is the basis, the true reality. The fundamental reality is not space-time. It's not time. It's not matter. It's not energy. It's consciousness within which all of these things occur, all of these incredibly complicated things that we don't really understand at the fundamental level, because we cannot understand them at the fundamental level. We have the analogs. We have the computer icons. We have the screen, and how we make sense of reality. And we use that amazing brain that we have to extrapolate far beyond what our senses can actually touch. But still, it's all occurring within our awareness, within our consciousness. And it's all getting mapped into what we can understand and manipulate. You don't understand. None of us will ever see a cosmic ray. None of us will ever touch a galaxy. But we can wax eloquent and poetic if we've had training and about what these things are and what they do and how they work. But every bit of that is extra perceptional. It means that it came into our consciousness, and we found ways to integrate it into our screen, into our analog of what reality really is. And then we developed ways of touching those things that we really don't have, particularly physically. We can't in any way touch a galaxy ever. We can't in any way interact with a cosmic ray or with anything outside of what we can touch and what we can hear and see. But yet we can populate our computer screen with ever more complicated sort of
images.
Icons is what Hoffman says. He calls them icons. We populate with these ever more complicated icons that are within our consciousness. So conscious realism really says that space-time doesn't exist. Consciousness exists within which we perceive something that we call space-time. That time itself, there is no time. But there is something within our consciousness that allows us to make sense of the universe, which is in the eternal now. Tolle is exactly right. There's nothing but the moment of now. But in our consciousness, we have to think about the past, which doesn't exist, and the future, which doesn't exist.
Well, it's interesting because I do remember Penrose. What's his first name?
Roger.
Sir Roger Penrose.
Sir Roger, exactly. Let's get this right here.
Had described your perception of time and space as a series of snapshots, one after the other, in every moment. And when you realize that your experience is a series of snapshots, who is the observer?
Right. Who's taking the pictures?
That you see the snapshot, and you are in that snapshot. So who is the observer? And once you realize that this is actually an interface, the way your mind is trying to comprehend this concept of space and time, as well as timelines, as past and future, you have a taste of how you form your interface, how your mind actually expands to encompass the experiences that you're having down here. And it's fascinating because with Penrose, if you're taking snapshots, those are two-dimensional little pictures that you're seeing, but it's more than that. More than just two dimensions. And you're in it and observing it. And it comes to that line that God had created man in order to learn about reflection of life broken down into this space-time. And it's just amazing when you think of it. It's like, wait, my mind, the consciousness is observing itself.
Yeah, aware of being aware is the way the psychologists who study this, the consciousness researchers said there's another and better word which I can't come up with at the moment, but the awareness of being aware, the fact that the way that you interact with the universe within your consciousness to orient yourself, and by yourself you mean your being, your awareness, to orient yourself within this thing that you just cannot properly understand. You have snapshots, which your mind and your consciousness weaves together into what it calls a consistent reality.
Right. And it was fascinating to see that the brain actually filters out segments of information that it picks up so that it can form a coherence of some kind, a story or a coherence to the consciousness. And it's fascinating to see the different tests that exist, to see how observant you actually are, and how much is actually filtered out that you do not see until it's pointed out to you.
Yeah. The narrative that the consciousness constructs. So let me just digress a moment here, because it can get deep and deep, and you say, well, that's just reality. Well, right now we have an amazing new thing in the world. It's artificial intelligence. And the most interesting things, some of the most interesting things about artificial intelligence are not all the wonderful things that it can do, is that in training it, we train it upon our perceptions of reality. But the thing which artificial intelligence is in some ways even a narrower view of actual reality than human beings have. Currently, artificial intelligence doesn't really touch anything. It doesn't really hear anything. It doesn't really see anything. It's given less than the snapshots that your consciousness gets. It's given less overall information. It's given a lot of experience which it has never had, and it has to kind of rely upon its training data, right? But yet, it is able to form hypotheses and sort of of predictions about the actual reality, which we say, oh yeah, that's right. It really understands something. We kind of anthropomorphize artificial intelligence, saying it's understanding. We don't know if it's understanding as we might say what we really mean by understanding, but it it agrees with to a high degree, it agrees with what we think reality is. Now, we could be biasing our artificial intelligence with what we are. We're biased towards surviving in this universe as human beings. We've created something which we're feeding basically everything we know. So it's kind of learning human, if you will, but it's not human. It doesn't have any real relationship to us at all at a physical level. It isn't even an animal. It's not anything organic whatsoever. It's really one of our other icons on the screen, just a really complicated one that we're feeding in a fire hose, a massive corpus of information into, giving it some very simple sort of feedback mechanisms, some rules about how to process this information, just a bunch of mathematics, very small amount of mathematics, really, at the end of the day, a little bit complicated, but at the end of the day, it's doing it over and over again all the time, right? So it uses this very simple sort of feedback mechanism, does it incredibly quickly, much more quickly on a basis of time than we can, if you compare to how fast an AI has to think. But at the end of the day, it's dealing with a lot less. So it's doing a lot more cycles on a lot less information, true information, if you will. And it's trying to map that onto what we call reality. And it's starting to agree. It agrees very, very, very well to the point where we say, oh, wow, it's really sort of thinking and understanding the universe. But if you just stop for a minute, this thing isn't a being. This is a construct. This is something which exists within our consciousness, yet it agrees with our reality to some extent. So it's another thing which is mirroring us and sort of reassuring us that maybe our idea of reality, all of us human beings, all 8 billion of us, as well as all the other animals on the planet, are kind of all figuring out reality. And now here we have this other thing, this rather novel new thing, which doesn't have a consciousness, but it's still kind of figuring out reality. Reality has an objective presence. It's true, but we can't really understand it except through our interface, what Hoffman calls it, our screen. We have our screen. Our screen is our consciousness, what is truly us within all the meat and bones and jelly. Our consciousness, which Hameroff and Penrose say is very likely a quantum phenomenon, that's kind of dancing in harmonics through this meat gooey thing. That consciousness is trying to understand everything else, trying to understand your body, trying to understand every of the 10,000 billion muscles in your body, trying to understand all those, trying to understand everything else it can touch, trying to understand everything it can see.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by the idea that we're made up of billions of living cells. And these are all kinds of organisms within your body. I mean, just your digestive tract alone, billions of cells that help you break down foods in order for you to be fed. But in order to do that, it's got to be coordinated. Now, if you think about it and you're like, well, am I coordinating all these colonies in my gut to
No.
or the cells that make up your heart, they all beat in time with one another. And that wonderful mechanism where once they touch, they sync up. so that they can contract in unison to push the blood through. But am I doing that? No, I can't tell or teach my heart how to do it, or any of the other cells that make up any part of your body.
Right, you're not telling your nails to grow.
Or your the different systems, your different organs. It's fascinating. It's like, how is this happening that all these organs, these little not little colonies, but they're like colonies that are all part of you, are working together to form a coherent, living, breathing body.
Right, they can huck rocks.
Right, that can that can throw things, yes, and form concepts, and then on top of that, interacting with other people as well as animals or the environment. It's a mind-blowing thing when you realize how much you're not really in control of,
right?
But you are forming an interface that helps you coordinate consciously certain things going on. My universe is going to interact with the other universes that are all here.
That's a very fair term, by the way. My universe.
Mm-hmm.
So where is the universe? And people say, where am I? You can't point to your consciousness. It's not possible. But nor can you point to the universe. People say, well, it's out there somewhere. Well, it's not. You can't touch the universe. There's no part of the universe that you can touch besides what you're standing on or what you're driving your car to work or whatever. Every other part of the universe is outside of you or of your local presence to touch. Yet the whole universe is within your perception. The entire universe is within your perception, within your consciousness. That in and of itself, we completely take for granted. We completely take for granted that I look up at, even just saying the words, I look up at a star. And I turn to somebody next to me and say, look at that star. And they look up and go, oh, yeah. Now, their universe and my universe both have a star in it or something that I call a star and they call a star. And we can agree to a fine degree of precision what that thing is, that star is, but yet neither one of us will ever actually interact with that star. We see some evidence of something, some faint glow, which we think came from a star. We just casually say, well, that's 100 billion light years away. And you go to yourself, well, of course, it's 100 billion light years. Everyone knows that. What the hell are we talking about?
What are we actually doing?
Because if you understand even a little bit about what light is, what we think light is, and then you understand what a year is. Well, a year, okay, that's like a year. Like I'm 12 and now I'm 13. That's a year. And you say, well, if I shot light for a year, I say, just let it go. So zoom, off it goes. And a year goes by. And say, how far away is that light? It's really far away. Like, wow. And so that took a year for it to go so far away that I'll never ever touch that light again. No one will ever touch that light. That light is gone. Then we say, well, that's 13 billion light years ago. Why, that's a lot. That's like, we can see that? Well, we think we can. But where does it really exist? It doesn't exist anywhere. You cannot ever touch it. It's in your consciousness. The whole bloody universe is in your consciousness. So what's fundamental? And that's what conscious realism really says, that the basis of their, and this is, there's a whole mathematical underlayment here, and it gets very deep. But the basis of the concept is what's fundamental in reality is consciousness. From there, you get collapse of the quantum state. From there emerges space, emerges time, emerges the past and the future. And all events, every event happens within consciousness. Now you say, well, but I'm only going to live, 100 years or whatever. That's true. So fundamentally, where is reality residing? There's a primordial consciousness somewhere. Oh, now you're talking about God. I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, just slow down. There's a primordial consciousness somewhere within which space and time and everything and now and all of it exists. We are part of that consciousness too, because we exist in some level. And if you say that the universe continues beyond us, then it has to go beyond our consciousness.
Right.
Well, that gets pretty deep pretty fast.
Well, we are deep.
And we are deep.
We are deep. What is the phrase? We contain multitudes.
We are vast.
Yes.
I am vast. I contain multitudes. That's
Mhm.
that's Ecclesiastes, which was a pretty good book.
But it's amazing because outside of this concept is also what is beauty at that point? How can you term beauty? And that is again one interface to another. Are we agreeing? And one thing we can agree on is that we've reached the end of our hour.
Within our consciousness, that's happened. So I'm Michael Lyons.
And I'm Margaret. And thank you for listening.